recognized.
Mr. President, I spoke on the Senate floor on December 11th about birthright citizenship, the guarantee contained in the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are deemed citizens. I reviewed the legal history of this provision, the legal guarantee designed to erase the horrible legacy of slavery that had been embodied in the Dred Scott v. Sanford decision. It was a desire to correct that decision that led to the inclusion of this definition of citizenship in the 14th Amendment. And I also rebutted during that speech two common misconceptions. First, that children born in the United States to parents from other countries are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That has been ruled false by the Supreme Court since the late 1890s. And second, a claim often made by the President-elect that the United States is unique in the world in guaranteeing citizenship to all who are born within this country. Indeed, as I'll discuss in a few minutes, the U.S. did in fact lead the way in guaranteeing birthright citizenship in the 1860s, but in doing so has led to a global movement that many other countries have decided to embrace. I believe the constitutional basis for birthright citizenship is clear, and those challenging the notion are mounting an argument with no legal basis. But today I want to move beyond the legal history and talk about the good that birthright citizenship brings to our nation. Children born in America to immigrant parents from all corners of the world and from all social conditions have been an enormous benefit to our country and indeed to my Commonwealth of Virginia. More than 47 million people living in the United States were born in another country, and another 16 million American children were born here to immigrant parents. Currently, more than 25% of all American children live in a household where at least one of their parents is an immigrant. How has immigration affected American society? Let's use one example, crime. The statistics are compelling and long-standing that immigration does not increase crime. Instead, the evidence is strong that crime has decreased as immigration has increased. In 1980, immigrants made up 6.2% of the American population, 45 years ago. By 2022, the percentage had more than doubled, with immigrants now making up nearly 14% of the American population. What happened to crime during that period as the percentage of immigrants in the United States doubled? During this time, the crime rate in this country, as measured by crimes committed per 100,000 people, has fallen by 60%. So again, as the portion of our population that is immigrant has more than doubled, the crime rate in our country has fallen by more than 60%. A recent study conducted by scholars at Northwestern University pulled crime data from the United States going back 150 years. And during that 150-year period, they were able to reach a uniform conclusion that immigrants during this 150-year period have always been incarcerated at lower rates than native-born Americans. Another recent study commissioned by the National Institute of Justice within the DOJ looked at all crimes committed in Texas from 2012 to 2018 and found that undocumented immigrants, the earlier statistics I've been giving are about immigrants generally, but this study in Texas found that undocumented immigrants are arrested at less than half of the rate of native-born U.S. citizens for violent crimes and drug crimes, and at less than a quarter of the rate of native-born citizens for property crimes. Immigration is a plus for the American economy. Immigrant households generated more than $236 billion in income in 2022 and paid nearly $66 billion in local, state, and federal taxes. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that immigration flows to the United States that are projected would likely increase American gross domestic product by nearly $9 trillion between now and 2034. And I know because of the background of the president, this next statistic will not surprise you. More than 45% of Fortune 500 companies in America were started by immigrants or by the children of immigrants. And this is not just a relic of the past, it sticks to today. In 2023, 17% of new businesses that were started in America during that year were started by immigrants, and another 17% were started by the children of immigrants. Fully 34% of new businesses in 2023 were started by immigrants or the children of immigrants. So it's clear to me, the great-grandson of 7 Irish immigrants and a Scottish immigrant whose dad was Scottish and mother was Irish, that throughout our history, immigrants have tremendously benefited this nation, and that is not something that is suddenly turning from a positive to a negative. In Virginia, for example, when I was born in 1958, about 1 out of 100 Virginians had been born in another country, and today it's more like 1 out of 8. And that has coincided during my lifetime with Virginia moving from bottom quarter per capita income among American states to top quarter. And that movement has been significantly advanced by talented people from around the world deciding that they wanted to make Virginia their home. Enough of the statistics. How about some stories? Children of immigrants have made powerful contributions to the very essence of America. Where would American fashion be without people like Ralph Lauren, who just got a presidential medal? Born Ralph Lifnitz, born in the Bronx to parents who had immigrated from Poland. Where would American politics be without people like Kamala Harris, born in California to parents who had immigrated from Jamaica and India? Or Marco Rubio, born in Florida to parents who had immigrated from Cuba? Or Nikki Haley, born in South Carolina to parents who had emigrated from the Punjab region of India? Or General and former Secretary of State Colin Powell, born in New York to parents who had immigrated from Jamaica? Where would American sports be without people like figure skater Michelle Kwan, born in California to parents who had emigrated from Hong Kong? Or baseball legend Alex Rodriguez, born in Manhattan to parents who had emigrated from the Dominican Republic? Where would American acting be without people like Renee Zellweger, born in Texas to parents who had emigrated from Switzerland and Norway? Or Bruce Lee, born in California to parents who had immigrated from Hong Kong and Shanghai? Where would American business be without people like ketchup magnate Henry Heinz, born in Pittsburgh to parents who emigrated from Germany? Or outdoor gear entrepreneur Eddie Bauer, born in Washington State to parents who had emigrated from Russia? Or cosmetics titan Estee Lauder, born in Queens to parents who emigrated from Hungary and Slovakia? Or entertainment executive David Geffen, born in Brooklyn to parents who emigrated from Mandatory Palestine? Where would American music be without people like Frank Sinatra, born in New York to Italian immigrants? Or George Gershwin, the child of Russian immigrants? All of these Americans were born here to immigrant parents, some of whose immigration status was unclear at the time of their birth, and some of whose parents were clearly undocumented. And that's the point of birthright citizenship. When America is at its best, the status of our parents doesn't limit our ability to contribute to our community. And that's part of the genius of our nation. I believe birthright citizenship, put into our Constitution in the 1860s to rectify the sin of slavery and the egregious Dred Scott decision, has really been a blessing to our country. And it has actually inspired a global movement, especially among nations in the Americas, to guarantee citizenship to all born within their borders. There's slightly more than 36 nations in the world that guarantee birthright citizenship, predominantly in the Americas. And why did it catch hold in the Americas? We called ourselves the New World. That was a phrase we often kind of used for the United States and the Americas. to contrast it with an old world, mostly nations in Europe, that tended to lock you in a social status based on who your parents were. That was a reality that was pretty common when English arrived in Jamestown in 1607 or at Plymouth Rock in 1619, and as Europeans and others were coming to the United States before we declared our independence in 1776, it was fairly common for people to be locked into a status where they were born. And that's why so many of our ancestors wanted to come to the United States, because they would not be locked into a social status based upon their parents' social status, and look into a future where their own kids and grandkids and great-grandkids would be locked into a status. And so the U.S., in the 14th Amendment, decided to embrace a definitively new world concept that if you're born in this country, you're a U.S. citizen. It doesn't matter who your parents are. And you have the same opportunities and responsibilities as anyone born in this country. It's part of the genius of this country. I could tell thousands of stories like the ones that I've shared, and I plan to speak more on this topic in the months to come, because I'm going to vigorously defend the constitutional principle of American birthright citizenship against any who would try to dilute it or tear it down. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Objection.
Mr. President, I rise as a member of the Armed Services Committee to discuss the nomination of Pete Hegseth to be our nation's Secretary of Defense. Let me make two preliminary comments. First, my philosophy about voting on nominees is to give deference to the President, who has been elected, who has a mandate that carries with it a mandate to assemble a leadership team in executive positions. And so I always begin with any president, Democrat or Republican, with a beginning standpoint. They should be able to assemble a team unless there are significant challenges with a nominee. Second, I do want to say that as part of the work that I've done in examining this nominee, I did review his military record, and I express my respect for the military record. Pete Hegseth's service in the military, my review of those Pentagon records suggested that he served in a very honorable way, and I want to acknowledge that. And yet I rise to oppose the nomination and urge my colleagues to oppose it, or at least take the time to really understand the gravity of behavioral challenges that have been demonstrated by Mr. Hegseth during his career. I have multiple problems with this nominee for this position, and this position, Secretary of Defense, is the position that I view and many Virginians view as the most important cabinet post. Let me review the reasons for my opposition. First, Mr. Hegseth's record of erratic, unprofessional, and troubling behavior. Mr. Hegseth was married twice before he is married to his current wife, his third wife. And in the first two marriages, there were allegations in both of serious and multiple infidelities. I asked him at the hearing when he appeared before us whether he took an oath of fidelity to his spouses, and of course he did, in the same way that a Secretary of Defense will take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. But the evidence that was before us, the public record that was before us, is very, very troubling. In Mr. Hegseth's first marriage, there were public reports that he was unfaithful to his wife at least 5 different times with multiple other people. He never rebutted that, and because he wouldn't meet with members of the committee on the Democratic side, we didn't get a chance to talk about that in a closed setting, which would have been most important. In his second marriage, he was married, and while married, fathered a child by a woman who would become his third wife in August of 2017. So he was still married to wife number 2 and cheated on her with the woman who would bear his child and become wife number 3. But in a very shocking way to me, within 2 months after the birth of this child, he was at a Republican political event at a hotel in Monterey, California, and cheated on both his second wife and the mother of this newborn in an incident that led to a sexual assault criminal investigation. This behavior, look, people are people. People make mistakes. But a first marriage breaking up over serial infidelity and then a second marriage also bedeviled by serial infidelity is something that has to call up questions about an individual's judgment. Mr. Hegseth has been the leader of 2 nonprofit organizations that are veteran service organizations. In one of the organizations, Concerned Veterans for America, during the time he was the CEO, an employee of the organization wrote a scathing report about Mr. Hegseth creating a toxic work culture in this environment where impairment by alcohol was not only exhibited by him but tolerated in others, and where there was a significant creation of a toxic work environment for women employees. The committee members have had access to a report that was not done because he was nominated for Secretary of Defense. This was a report that was done by employees and given to the leaders of this organization at the time, now nearly 10 years ago, with about 35 names of employees and individuals in the organization with knowledge of the facts and recitation of event after event after event where people were treated unfairly, women were made to feel that they were second class in the organization, and alcohol abuse was common in workplace events. I referenced a sexual assault claim in Monterey, and I will call it an undisclosed sexual assault claim because Mr. Hegseth never told the Trump transition team about this event when he was being considered and vetted to be Secretary of Defense. Again, he's married to wife 2. He's now fathered a child by a woman being unfaithful in that wedding, and within 2 months after fathering the child, he goes to an event in Monterey, California, gets a woman at the event into his hotel room, has sex with her. She claims she was drugged and raped and filed a criminal complaint about it with local law enforcement within days after the event. He admits the event. He says it was consensual, not a sexual assault or rape, consensual, but he acknowledges that it occurred. What then happened? The survivor went to local law enforcement, filed a sexual assault claim. The claim was investigated over a period of time. The prosecutor ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges against Mr. Hegseth. But there was a civil claim as well that later led to a settlement with the victim, payment of cash to the victim, and the entrance into a non-disclosure agreement with the victim. None of this was disclosed to the Trump team as they were examining Mr. Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. He didn't disclose the event. He didn't disclose the criminal sexual assault claim. He didn't disclose the fact of an investigation. He didn't disclose the civil claim. He didn't disclose the settlement. He didn't disclose the cash payment. He didn't disclose the non-disclosure agreement. He hid all of it from the Trump transition team. And when I asked him why, he didn't really have an answer, and I told him, I know the reason why. You were worried that if you told them about this, they would not nominate you to be Secretary of Defense. The relationship between a Secretary of Defense and a president is a very important relationship that demands complete candor. There's always some challenge. There's always something at the Pentagon that might be going wrong. Mr. Hegseth demonstrated at a very critical moment that he would not let the president-elect know about this fact because he wanted to advance himself, and he worried that if he was candid, it would cause problems for him. I don't want a Secretary of Defense who is unwilling to be candid with the Commander-in-Chief. And he's already demonstrated grave reason to doubt whether he will be candid by refusing to disclose the reality of this sexual assault allegation in Monterey. An affidavit was filed yesterday by one Danielle Hegseth, the former sister-in-law of the nominee, revealing publicly facts suggesting spousal abuse in Mr. Hegseth's second marriage. I don't know Danielle Hegseth. I haven't talked to her. I was not aware of that allegation, but it didn't surprise anyone on the committee who had reviewed the record. Why not? Because there are already facts in the record raising this very question. In fact, I asked Mr. Hegseth about it at the Armed Services Committee. During his second divorce, his own mother wrote him a letter saying, essentially, you are a serial abuser of women, including your own 2 wives, and you need to look in the mirror, get some help, and figure this out. His mother even used the phrase, neither X nor Y, the names of the first 2 wives, deserved the treatment they have received at your hand. All the committee members had access to that before the hearing. All of them. What an extraordinary letter. Your mother writing you a letter saying you're a serial abuser of women that needs to look in the mirror and get help, and saying that the 2 wives that you have abused do not deserve the treatment they have received at your hand. And so the allegation from Danielle Hegseth yesterday, reporting her observations of Mr. Hegseth's behavior, and in particular abuse of her sister-in-law, have to be given some credence by this committee. And we have to avoid a rush that we may regret. I found it very unusual that when I asked Mr. Hegseth at the hearing, a sexual assault would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, he would not agree with me. Spousal abuse would be disqualifying to be a Secretary of Defense, he would not agree with me. Being impaired by alcohol while on the job would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, he would not agree with me. These are not hard questions. They are clearly disqualifying behaviors, and the fact that he would not agree that they were disqualifying behaviors suggested to me, as I was watching that testimony, that they evinced a little bit of a guilty conscience. Why would I want to agree if I have concerns about my own behavior? What has been Mr. Hegseth's response to allegations of infidelity demonstrating poor judgment, creation of a toxic work culture, alcohol impairment while at work, this undisclosed sexual assault claim, the allegations of spousal abuse? What has his response been? His response has been twofold. Complete denial. Complete denial, with the exception of acknowledging that, yes, he did cheat on his wife and the mother of a newborn child in Monterey, California in September 2017. He has denied everything else, even though the record is replete with specific instances at specific times with specific individuals attesting to these behaviors. His other defense is to claim that all of this, all of it, is an anonymous smear. An anonymous smear. Let me tell my colleagues, this is anything but anonymous. When your own mother writes you a letter saying you are a serial abuser of women, including your 2 wives, and they don't deserve the treatment they have received at your hand, that is not anonymous. The report of the whistleblower at the Concerned Veterans of America organization a decade ago, anything but anonymous. The report listed, I counted them, incidents involving 36 named individuals who had been either participating in, victimized by, witnessing, or aware of the incidents described in the document. This is not anonymous. Danielle Hegseth's public affidavit is not anonymous. The one thing that I will acknowledge that's in the anonymous space is this: the number of individuals who have come forward and shared with me and other members of the committee their own firsthand knowledge of similar events, but said, you can't use my name because I'm so afraid. I'm afraid of what Mr. Hegseth would do. I'm afraid of what the president might do. I had someone say to me when I said, you needn't be afraid, that's easy for you to say. That's easy for you to say. If the building, the U.S. Capitol where you work, could be attacked by people when it was well fortified and secured, what chance would I have if someone didn't like the fact that I publicly criticized this nominee? So yes, there are some who are speaking to us who are asking for anonymity, and that, if they've asked for it, they should be provided it. But there are many who have spoken either directly via affidavit or in records that are available to all committee members and all senators who are anything but anonymous. And I would urge my colleagues, and not just the Armed Services Committee members, to go and read the documents that are available to you before you cast your vote, set your feet in stone about a nominee. You should see these documents. I want to go back to one point that I made that I think is telling, and that is Mr. Hegseth's refusal to disclose these facts to the Trump transition team. I mean, it's one thing to not disclose them to the committee. It's one thing to refuse to meet with members of the committee. I'll get to that in a second. But when the president-elect, who's going to be the commander-in-chief, is vetting you for the most important cabinet position in the United States, and you know you have been charged with a sexual assault that led to a criminal investigation, a civil settlement, a cash payment, a non-disclosure agreement, and you choose not to reveal it to the president, in my view, that in and of itself should be disqualifying. The level of disrespect that that shows for the president-elect, in my view, should be disqualifying. Let me conclude with a couple of other points. The main point is the pattern of behavior, which should make anyone wary to vote for Mr. Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. But a couple of other points I want to mention. Mr. Hegseth, I think, sort of set a very unfortunate precedent. I have been on the Armed Services Committee. I sit side by side with my colleague, Senator King, on that committee since we came to the Senate in January of 2013. I have now participated in confirmation hearings for about 5 Secretaries of Defense, both Democratic and Republican nominees. Mr. Hegseth is the only one that refused to meet with Democratic members of the committee, save for the chairman, Jack Reed. He met with the Republican committee members, but all of us were trying to set meetings with him, as has been our norm, so that we could talk to him about these issues and ask him questions privately in our office. Some of these matters are, frankly, probably better for private discussion than public discussion, but he stiff-armed every one of us except Jack Reed. Now, in some ways, maybe it's not a surprise. This is an individual who's written books and articles where he said Democrats are evil, Democrats are the adversary. But if you're nominated to be Secretary of Defense of the Pentagon, it's a non-political military. It's a civilian military that should not be politicized. And if you begin the job saying, I needn't even sit down and pay the respect of meeting with Democratic senators, what about Democrats that serve in the military? Or independents, or libertarians, or people who don't share Mr. Hegseth's party affiliation? What does it say to the men and women who work for our military when he wouldn't even pay the respect paid by every predecessor that they would meet with senators of both parties before the hearing? I was very disturbed the other day when we had a committee hearing to forward Mr. Hegseth's nomination, and the Republican majority asked for a waiver to forward it faster than rules allow, and that waiver can be granted if the committee votes to do so. And one of my colleagues, Senator Warren, said to the Republicans, wait, you're asking us to waive normal rules? We don't want to waive normal rules to speed this along. He wouldn't even meet with us. I thought that was a pretty compelling argument. I understand if Mr. Hegseth has no respect for the senators in this body who are Democrats, that's one thing. But I would expect my Senate colleagues to have some respect for us. I've served with members of this committee on the Republican side. Some have been there the entire 12 years I've been there. I didn't think they would tolerate a nominee stiff-arming me. If there was a Democratic nominee for Secretary of Defense who refused to meet with Republican members of the committee, I would raise heck about that publicly in the committee and threaten to block the nominee until he met with the Republican members of the committee. I know Senator King would do the same thing. Democrats would do the same thing. We would not tolerate a nominee stiff-arming one side of the dais and refusing to meet with us. We wouldn't tolerate it. I was shocked that my Republican colleagues in a closed meeting 2 days ago demonstrated that they're just fine with that. This is my favorite committee in the Senate. We work very cooperatively in a bipartisan way, and that my Republican colleagues are perfectly fine with us being disrespected because we happen to be Democrats who our citizens elected us to serve in the United States Senate is very, very shocking to me. One other point that I want to bring up. I've revealed much material that is in the record and that other senators can view for themselves. But I have to say, in looking at the investigation record, which was compiled largely by the FBI, it was very, very weak. The FBI went out to do an investigation of Mr. Hegseth. The report was made available to the chair and the ranking member, not to the members of the committee. We haven't seen the report, but we have been able to ask questions of the chair and ranking about it. The allegations that I've walked through, which are largely public record, the FBI didn't even interview the wives. Even after a mother's letter had said that you were a serial abuser of women, including your 2 wives, the FBI did not even go out and interview the wives. Why not? I mean, was it an investigation or just like a box-checking exercise? A number of us, when we heard that, we sort of raised hell about it. Like, if you're going to do an investigation, talk to the people who know the nominee the best, and the 2 wives are people you ought to talk to. We embarrassed the FBI. And so after the fact, they went out and did a very cursory discussion with one of the wives. And again, I have not seen that material. I've not been allowed to see it. That should itself shock my colleagues and the public. But I have confirmed in speaking about it with the ranking and chair that the interview with the wife was very cursory, covered one set of topics, but left many of the questions that I've raised here completely unanswered and unaddressed. A nominee to be Secretary of the Defense is going to have enormous power over the physical safety of Americans and over peace, war, and diplomacy in the world. Aren't we as senators exercising our advise and consent role entitled to a background investigation that is meaningful, that is searching, that is comprehensive? Are we supposed to just be given some half-work product and say, okay, that's great, let's just rush to confirm somebody? We shouldn't be confirming a person on an insufficient background check if they didn't have all of these acknowledged problems that are part of the public record. But when they are part of the public record, when the FBI finds out that, wow, you didn't tell the transition team about the sexual assault claim, the investigation should be thorough, not mediocre and cursory. And so, Mr. President, I'm going to conclude and just say this may not be the last time I appear on the floor to speak on this nomination. But for now, my request of my colleagues is a simple one. Why rush? Why rush? Why would we rush to put through a nomination for a position of this importance that is freighted with so much baggage and so much evidence of glaring character and judgment errors? Do we want to have egg on our face? Do we want to rush and have this blow up later? Do we want to rush and then have other witnesses come out as Danielle Hegseth did yesterday? Is that what the Senate's advise and consent process, mandated by the Constitution for a very important reason, has come to? Cursory investigation that doesn't get to the underlying facts, even when they're sitting right out there before us, and we're going to rush to confirm someone? For what reason? And so, Mr. President, as I sit down, I'll just conclude with that question. Why rush this? Let's take the time, and when we cast a vote on confirmation, cast it with the confidence that we have complete information about the man who's been nominated to be our Secretary of Defense. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also-Brooks.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I rise briefly to just draw my colleagues' attention to two items that, though seemingly unconnected, that happened last week, I think are deeply connected. On Inauguration Day, January 20, President Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border of the United States, and I just want to read two sentences from that declaration. January 20, 2025. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have tragically died from drug overdoses because of the illicit narcotics that have flowed across the southern border. I think 100 people in this chamber would acknowledge that to be true. And the second sentence in the same order, as Commander-in-Chief, I have no more solemn duty than to protect the American people. I think 100 people in this chamber would agree that is the most solemn duty of the Commander-in-Chief. Those two sentences are why I was so surprised at an action the President took the next day, January 21, 2025. The pardon of drug kingpin Ross Ulbricht. I want to read a summary of the crimes for which Mr. Ulbricht was imprisoned and raise the question of why the President, who had expressed concern about drug running and said that his top goal was to protect the American people, would choose to do this on the second day of his presidency. Mr. Ulbricht launched Silk Road in 2011 and turned it into one of the most popular outposts of the so-called dark web, a hidden corner of the internet that people can access only through a special browser. Silk Road facilitated over 1.5 million transactions, generating more than $200 million in revenue from the sale of heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and other drugs. $200 million. Users transacted anonymously with Bitcoin, then a nascent cryptocurrency, and could post Amazon-style product ratings. In 2013, the FBI arrested Mr. Ulbricht at a San Francisco library and charged him with running Silk Road. In court, prosecutors presented evidence that Mr. Ulbricht had also solicited the murders of people he considered threats to his business, though he was never tried on the murder for hire charges, and there was no indication that any killings took place. At least 6 deaths were attributed to drugs bought on Silk Road, prosecutors said in court. A federal judge in the Southern District of New York, where the case was tried, called Mr. Ulbricht, quote, the kingpin of a worldwide digital drug trafficking enterprise, whose actions were, quote, terribly destructive to our social fabric. In 2015, he received a life sentence for drug distribution, money laundering, and other charges, and was eventually moved to a federal prison in Arizona. That account is from one of the many news articles describing the prosecution of Mr. Ulbricht and the pardon that was issued by President Trump on January 21. And I just want to raise the obvious question. If illicit narcotics trafficking is sufficient to declare a national emergency, then why one day later was it a justifiable, appropriate, laudable use of presidential power to give a pardon to somebody who had set up an online global digital drug trafficking network that had generated $200 million in revenue, 1.5 million transactions of sales of illicit drugs, 6 overdose deaths of individuals, and other challenges? One of the problems with the surplus of executive orders in the first few days is that sometimes the sheer number can cause you to lose sight of some of what's happening. And I would assert that the pardon of Mr. Ulbricht undercuts the legitimacy of the claim that what Mr. President Trump is worried about is drug trafficking. Because if drug trafficking is bad, it's not only bad at the southern border, it's bad when somebody sets up an online drug trafficking market generating $200 million in revenue from illicit drugs and leading to overdose deaths of individuals. And this is an action that is water under the bridge. There's nothing that can be done about it now, but if the only thing that can be done is to put it on the public record so that people can be aware less than 24 hours after this emergency declaration, this drug trafficker was pardoned, I feel like that's an important thing that needs to be made visible to the American public. And with that, Mr. President, I yield. This morning I came into work and I had an email from one of the largest federally qualified health centers in Virginia, located in Hampton Roads, 1.6 million people in the southeast portion of our state, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Hampton, Portsmouth, Chesapeake, these communities. And they said, look, we are the healthcare safety net of first resort for a lot of low and moderate income people. And we've done this for years. And we receive federal funding. In fact, federal funding for most of our FQHCs is about 20 to 25% of their budget. They tend to get paid the last day of the month. Yesterday was the 3rd of February. They indicated they had not received their January payment, and when they were reaching out to determine whether they would receive the January payment, or the February payment for that matter, they wouldn't even be given the courtesy of an answer. There is grave, grave concern about the numerous efforts that this administration has taken with respect to federal employees and with respect to the funding freeze. The funding freeze that was announced last week was partially retracted by the administration. It has been partially and temporarily enjoined in now multiple court cases. But as the email from this morning indicated, organizations who should be receiving funds, if the funding freeze is in fact enjoined, are still not receiving them. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do to get to the bottom of this. The administration has not shared with any of us what their plans are. The analogy that I've used is it's like somebody has taken a jigsaw puzzle and dumped the pieces down upside down on a table in front of me. All I'm seeing is the cardboard backside. I don't have the box with the picture on it. Every time I talk to a constituent, a federal employee, somebody who works at a domestic violence shelter, a mayor, I can turn over a piece of the puzzle based upon what they're telling me. And as I turn it over, I can start to assemble what is in fact happening. And we need to do more to assemble it. And I just want to pledge to Virginians I'm going to be doing all I can to make sure you're protected. But what I want to do now is read a letter that I have written and that I am posting today on my website and disseminating publicly, specifically to federal workers. It is a letter that tries to honor them and give them a pep talk and also direct them to resources that they can access in case they're concerned. And once again, Madam President, 140,000 of these workers live in my Commonwealth. Dear federal workers, as you're all too aware, we're in a dark time. The Trump administration has made plain that it wants to kick you around by blocking your ability to administer federal resources, censoring your free speech, locking you out of your workplaces, demonizing you in the press, and sending you ominous and at times threatening messages. These actions are shameful and harmful not only to you, but to the Americans across the country that you serve. But especially in the darkest of times, we must stay focused on finding our guiding lights. I hope you will let the call of service that you answered when you first swore your oaths as federal employees to serve as that light. My advice to you today is simple, even if it's not easy. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep serving everyday folks. You are here because of your expertise. You are here because of your patriotism. You are here because you know the value in dedicating your life to serving your fellow Americans. America needs you, and that has never been clearer than in the wake of the administration's federal funding freeze last week. I heard from folks in every corner of Virginia about the invaluable support they receive from federal workers just like you. Across the country, Americans are counting on you to deliver crucial services, from inspecting our food to make sure it's safe, to protecting our national security, from administering Social Security benefits to staffing air traffic control towers, to supporting our allies around the world and keeping the influence of China, Iran, and Russia at bay. I know it has been and will continue to be tough. Donald Trump and cronies are determined to do anything they can to knock you off course. They've even dangled a phony buyout in your face. But make no mistake, that buyout is a trap. Donald Trump has no authority to offer you a resignation buyout. Don't trust a guy with a long history of stiffing contractors by taking him up on a sham deal that he won't follow through on. You aren't alone. I'm going to be here with you every day working alongside you in service. I want to share with you some specific ways in which I want to be a resource to you. On my website, kaine.senate.gov, I am collecting stories from federal workers about what you are experiencing. Under no circumstances will I publicly share any information you send me without your consent. You can also choose to submit your information anonymously if you prefer. I will be updating my webpage with information that may be helpful to you, including summaries of your rights, recourse you can seek if you believe you are being illegally terminated, and answers to other frequently asked questions my office is receiving. Please know that I'm doing everything I can to stand up for you, just like you're standing up for and serving American people. Thanks for all that you do. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum. The discussion about Russell Vogt, the President's nominee to be Director of the Office of Management and Budget. But before I do, I thought I would just share with my colleagues and all who are in the chamber a vigil that I just attended. There was a vigil at a riverfront park in Alexandria near the site where the flight went down a week ago, killing 67 people on the American Airlines flight and the Army helicopter that had deployed out of Fort Belvoir. And it was a simple, moving candlelight vigil that it was organized by my friend Don Beyer in the House of Representatives. It was attended by a few hundred people, mostly residents of Alexandria and Arlington, nearby communities. There was a heavy representation of law enforcement there because the Alexandria police and fire departments were very integral to the research and the rescue and recovery operations that were ongoing. It was somber. It was somber. You struggle for words at a time like that. I couldn't think of any of my own that really were that enlightening, so I fell back on Psalm 90, teach us how short our lives are so that we may become wise, thinking about the children, the ice skaters, and their friends and families who were killed. But frankly, all of us have short lives, even the oldest of those who died that day, the mother who was celebrating her birthday, a wife who was on her way home, whose husband was waiting for her in the airport, these coaches, folks who were in Wichita doing a pipe fitter training program. And frankly, all of the attendees, our lives are all short. And so what is the wisdom, if you follow the logic in Psalm 90, teach us how short our lives are so that we may become wise? Well, what is the wisdom that we are to gain if we understand that our lives are short? Well, the psalmist doesn't really say. The psalmist kind of leaves us to conclude for ourselves what is the wisdom we are to gain out of such situations and out of the realization of the temporal nature of human life. But what I said to people there is, if there is one bit of wisdom that you should gain when you realize how mortal we all are, it's probably wisdom about the value of community. That we link arms and we support each other. Certainly, if we're celebrating positives, we ought to do that, but particularly when we're mourning and we're thinking about lives lost and lives and futures cut short, our wisdom should compel us to find solace and comfort in each other's company. This vigil lasted about a half hour. We had candles, and after Representative Beyer spoke and I spoke and the mayor of Alexandria, Mayor Gaskin, spoke, then the chaplain of the Alexandria Police Department gave a closing prayer, and the service was over. But we stayed. We stayed to visit with each other and comfort one another. And I was struck, because I was coming here to speak tonight, that I met a guy from DHS who was involved in the recovery effort in frigid waters out on the Potomac. I met a key official from Fort Belvoir, where the 3 soldiers had deployed from in the training flight who were killed that night. I met other people who are part of the federal family, who work in air traffic control, who work in the FAA. Alexandria is pretty close to the Pentagon. I met people who work at the Pentagon, whose family members do. I met some folks who weren't federal employees, but they talked to me about, one woman talked to me about her son who was a federal employee, is a federal employee, currently stationed in Tennessee. I took that to mean member of the armed services. This was the random community that gathered to commemorate the 67 lost lives and comfort one another. And while we were there to focus on the tragic accident, most wanted to talk to me about their own fears for their careers and for their families and for others who are feeling confused and afraid right now because of actions that are being taken against federal employees. And that brings me to Russell Vogt. My colleagues have spoken on the floor about a particular statement of Mr. Vogt's that I examined him about fairly aggressively during the Budget Committee hearing. In the course of a speech, he said, I want federal employees to be traumatized. I want to put them in trauma. I want them to come to work, to not want to come to work because they know that they are increasingly viewed as the villain. Now, who talks like that? I mean, who talks like that? Is there a single manager or leader or organizational chief that we admire who believes that their mission, their happiness, their glee, their purpose is to make their workforce feel traumatized? No, we would never celebrate a leader of that kind, and yet that is precisely what Russell Vogt said. I asked him, do you really mean that? Do you really want air traffic controllers to come to work traumatized? Well, no, I didn't mean that. Do you want people who inspect our food to come to work traumatized? No, I didn't mean that. Well, how about people at OMB? You ran it before, you're running it again. A lot of folks might call OMB staffers bureau. Do you want them to coming to work traumatized? No, I don't like that. But that's what he said. When he was not in front of a Senate budget panel and he was speaking candidly, and there's a beautiful biblical phrase, I think it's from the Gospel of Luke, that says, from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. When he was speaking directly from the heart, what he said is, I want federal employees to be traumatized. What I want to do in my time on the floor tonight is talk a little bit about these federal employees and what having a traumatized workforce means. And then for a few minutes, I want to focus upon not the federal workforce, but on others who are affected by the Russell Vogt strategy on the federal budget. What I've heard from Virginians just in the week since the funding pause order went into place, which all agree was something that was masterminded by Russell Vogt. Federal employees. Yesterday, I decided, after hearing stories from federal employees, to launch on a website a resource where federal employees could share their stories if they chose to, with anonymity guaranteed, because so many are afraid. And some will remember that I took the floor yesterday and I read an open letter to federal employees. There's 140,000, give or take, in Virginia. And I read an open letter offering them a bit of a pep talk, encouraging them to keep doing what you're doing, serving your fellow Americans. Just do that. You signed up for the job to do that. Don't pay attention to all these things and all this trauma. I know that's such hard advice to give to somebody, but just keep serving your fellow Americans every day. And if you have a problem, call our office and we'll try to be helpful if we can. No guarantee that we'll be able to avert this, but just do what you have a passion to do and we'll try to help you if we can. But I also, in launching, in delivering that letter to federal employees, we launched a website in my office, and we encouraged people to share their stories. Within 3 hours, we had about 400 stories of federal employees who had reached out and shared. And those stories keep coming in. Some are asking us to give them a call and probe further details. Some are giving us their names and the agencies where they work, and some are too afraid to give us those. But what I thought I would do tonight is I've just taken 18 of these stories from the federal employees who've just come in less than 24 hours of the hundreds that have been submitted. And I just want to read some to you to tell you about who these people are who Mr. Vogt believes need to be traumatized, who these people are that Mr. Vogt wants to personally make them feel as if they are the villains. First, a federal employee who works at USAID. After 2 extremely painful miscarriages, I'm now 34 weeks pregnant with my first child. Since my husband works as a lawyer for the EPA, what should have been a joyful time in our life now feels like a dystopian hellscape, and we are very afraid for our future and our financial security. We're just hoping to have health insurance at this point for when I give birth, but that feels uncertain. I swore an oath, and I believe in the work that USAID does. I believe that it makes America stronger, safer, and more prosperous, just as Secretary Rubio is calling for. And I will support the agency until they boot me from the system. God help us all. 34 weeks pregnant after 2 extremely painful miscarriages, just hoping that she will not lose her job and her health insurance. Second story, a federal employee working for the National Science Foundation, headquartered in Virginia. NSF funding supported my undergraduate summer research experiences, my PhD project, and my previous job. The opportunity to give back and support the next generation of US-based scientists was a dream fulfilled, and I'm terrified that I will be fired as soon as Friday with no protections or severance. The fair compensation and flexible schedule lets my spouse work as a teacher, and she is so great at her job, but that will not pay our mortgage. We simply never accounted for a scenario like this. A third story from a federal employee working at USAID. I've worked at USAID for 12 years, including in Bosnia, Rwanda, and now Washington. Our work is and has always been critical to advancing democracy, American interests, and the prosperity, safety, and strength of Americans. We will continue this work. The attack on USAID lacks intelligence and foresight. China and Russia are filling the vacuum, outspending the U.S. and deepening partnerships with our allies who feel abandoned. This is creating permanent damage and undoing decades of progress in a few days. This does the opposite of making America stronger, safer, and more prosperous. These are the direct words of Virginians who've shared their stories with me. A fourth story, a federal employee working at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm a young person working in the federal government. I graduated from college 4 years ago. And since then, I have committed my time to serving the public and helping the environment. I served 2 AmeriCorps terms and worked 2 seasonal federal jobs before finally landing a permanent federal job last November. These last few weeks have been a hell for us federal workers. I come to work with a pit in my stomach. I'm a probationary employee, so will probably be the first to go during a RIF. They've left us in the dark while constantly terrorizing us with threatening, passive-aggressive messages and half-legal deals to resign. I fear for my job, but I fear more for my country. A federal employee who works for the Department of Transportation. I'm frightened about my position. I'm a single-income household, and I'm convinced no one has my back. Congress has been pretty much silent, and the news has gained very little traction nationwide. We need people to tell the story about what government workers do. Thank you for providing the platform to connect. We're only in this to serve the American public. A federal employee working for the Department of Defense. It's hard to even know where to start. As soon as this administration took office, it felt like federal workers were under siege. They began with their flurry of executive orders and memos. They put Elon Musk, who no one elected, who's not a federal employee, but yet has huge contracts for other areas with the government, in charge of handling the potential mass layoffs of federal workers. His fingerprints were all over these actions, from insecure servers being jammed into the OPM, to poorly crafted mass emails meant to stir chaos and bypass all chains of command, to then bragging about it on social media and insulting and belittling every one of the millions of federal workers as, quote, unproductive. Also laughing at people in his giant social media platform who mock us and call us stupid. No one knows what job security looks like. No one trusts anything these people are saying to us, especially with these deferred resignation mass emails. The entirety of OPM, once a solid standard for human resources in the United States, is now a total joke. Agencies are left scrambling because they've been given zero guidance and have no serious leadership coming from the administration. All of this is frightening, anxiety-inducing, depressing, and wrong. It's so difficult to fight the misinformation because if you out yourself as a Fed, you'll be piled upon. We're middle-class workers with burdens and families and debt just like everybody else. We need our jobs and we'll fight for them. I take my oath to the Constitution seriously. Please, anyone with power, exercise that power and serve justice. A federal employee at the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, headquartered in Alexandria. I've served the American public for the last 10 years at different positions in the USPTO. The USPTO's mission is actually outlined in the Constitution, quote, to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. To that end, the USPTO uses telework to attract and retain highly qualified people. These people work hard every day, in and out, to serve the American people. As a result, the United States has been the beacon of innovation for much of the world. In fact, so many inventors come to the U.S. to secure intellectual property. Let me be clear, the people at USPTO are incredibly talented, hardworking people. They are not the opposing team or low productivity. The constant harassment from the current administration underscores the diligent efforts of over 14,000 people that keep this economy moving forward. Another story from a federal employee working for the General Service Administration. Thanks for the opportunity to share my story. The ongoing threats of job losses due to a reduction in force have been deeply demoralizing. As you know, federal employees already earn on average 25% less than our private sector counterparts. The disregard for union contracts is deeply concerning and undermines the commitments made to the workforce. Many of my talented and hardworking colleagues have been living in fear for weeks, facing uncertainty they don't deserve. This unlawful treatment not only undermines their dedication, but also creates an environment of instability and anxiety that no employee should have to endure. Here's a story from a Virginia federal employee working for the Department of Homeland Security. And this is a pretty common one. My husband and I are both federal employees, and we're both on probation, meaning they're relatively new employees. We also have student loan debts and under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. If we lose our jobs because we're on probation, we will lose the ability to have our payments to public service loan forgiveness counted. We will not be able to pay for childcare. We will lose our apartment. Furthermore, the DC area will be flooded with fired federal workers, and we won't be able to find jobs easily. Our future is increasingly bleak. Please, please stop them. Another employee working for the Department of Homeland Security. I've worked for DHS for 15 years. I truly believe a strong, healthy workforce of civilian servants is vital for a strong, healthy America. Our government has a duty to protect its citizens. This, to me, includes making sure people's basic needs are met, be it healthcare, food, housing, education. The private sector isn't taking on the obligation. The federal government isn't profit-driven, which is partly why our jobs are secure. My worth as an employee is not tied up with how much product I sell. My worth depends on doing my best to improve the lives of American people. A federal employee who didn't feel comfortable even sharing the agency that he or she works for. It's impossible to get our work done under these conditions. It's been a constant assault on us federal workers who are all serving our country faithfully and to the best of our abilities. I've served under different administrations, Republican and Democrat, and been proud to do so. As a family, we're canceling our vacations for the year, any unnecessary subscriptions or expense, and tightening our belt because I don't know if I will have a job by the end of the year. While I could be comfortably making double my salary in the private sector, I chose federal service out of a sense of duty to my country and to use my skills to better the lives of fellow Americans. Now it feels as if the federal government is not holding its end of the bargain. The last 2 weeks have been a nightmare. A federal employee who works for the Defense Health Administration. Senator Kaine, I'm a DHA healthcare civilian worker. I worked for 12 years for the Army at Keller Army Community Hospital at the U.S. Military Academy in New York. And for the last 4+ years at the medical clinic on the Dahlgren base in Virginia, which is a little bit east of Fredericksburg. I'm so upset. Our local commander, my supervising commander, and a lieutenant general heading DHA have all emailed us since the famous, quote, fork in the road email came out. They all said the same thing. They don't have any information or clarification for us, but will reach out to us when they do. I check daily, and to date, no information. Stop and think about that for a minute. This DHA employee received a fork in the road letter drafted by Elon Musk. This is somebody who has worked for the DHA for many, many years. The DHA employee reaches out to their own direct supervisor. We don't have any information for you. We can't clarify what this letter means. They reach out to the base commander. We don't have any information. We can't clarify what the letter means. Even reaches out to the very head, the lieutenant general at the head of the Defense Health Administration, asking, what does this mean? We don't have any information for you. We can't clarify what this letter means. Just imagine that. The entire chain of command in this agency responsible for providing health care to our troops is unable to tell the medical professionals providing service to our active duty military every day what this fork in the road letter even means. It's shocking. I check daily, and to date, no information. Another federal employee who did not feel comfortable sharing the agency where he or she works. Since inauguration, times have been hell for us because every day is loaded with uncertainty regarding the future state of our contract work and our federal counterparts we work with daily. To this day, every work day is filled with dread and anxiety. Our firm has begun cutting staff already because there's simply no funding. This is also becoming the norm across other areas within our company. This clearly must be from an individual who works with a federal contractor, I suspect probably with USAID. It's unfortunate because many are newer young people just trying to earn a living and starting off public service careers and now getting stuck dealing with the mess that is everything now. Here's another letter from a federal contractor working for USAID. I work as a USAID contractor. In the past week, I've experienced near everyone in my company getting placed on furlough. Beyond the fact that we're all working to make international development more impactful, and the fact that the U.S. company we've invested so much time in may never come back from this, we're all without salary and uncertain for the future. We're applying for jobs, but acknowledge that with so many also furloughed or terminated, there's extremely challenging competition. Do we move away from our home in D.C.? Do we leave the industry which we made our careers so that we could see making the world a better place and the U.S. a better place? Here's a federal employee working for a small independent agency. Again, the employee didn't feel comfortable identifying it. It's always been my dream to be a federal employee. Ever since civics class in grade school, I saw what the government and feds could do for people and realized I wanted to pour my heart and soul into doing just that. But the wind's been taken out of my sails. I'm a probationary employee, meaning my name is on the short list to fire. I was hired under Schedule A, persons with disabilities. So my name is on that list too. I feel like I'm being threatened by the very institutions that were created to safeguard the principles of truth, compassion, and respect. I've lived my life placing others' needs in front of mine, trying to practice what I preach. But I'm being forced to remove protected classes from our website, take down reports on DEIA. It's interesting, the Trump executive order tried to kill DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, but in many of the documents that are being sent to agencies, they're adding an A at the end, and I never had seen that before. DEIA, what is the A? Accessibility. Even though the executive order signed by the president did not specifically attack accessibility programs for those with disabilities. The implementation documents that are going out from the administration are adding accessibility as a negative that needs to be rooted out of the federal workplace. Could anything be crueler than that? Being forced to take down these reports on things, including accessibility, the writer says, I feel as though there's blood on my hands doing this. It breaks my heart. Finally, one last story, and then I'll say a word about federal funding to programs around Virginia, moving on from just sharing the stories of my federal employees. And this is another federal employee who doesn't feel comfortable. Actually, not one last story, I have three more. This is from a federal employee who doesn't feel comfortable revealing the agency where he or she works. Today, I woke up to an email saying we had a restraining order tied to Trump's executive orders that would limit how we would disperse our grants. Since the EOs were so vaguely defined to begin with, this could be a witch hunt for all kinds of programs and grants we give out. A federal employee from an unnamed agency. I'm a senior human resource professional in the Department of the Interior. Department of the Interior. I'm on daily calls with department HR leaders who receive direction from OPM. Today, leadership mentioned that their coordination was with DOGE employees rather than with actual OPM employees. These DOGE employees have full access to our USA staffing hiring system, which includes personally identifiable information for all applicants, not all employees, for all applicants to any position in the federal government. It is unclear what kind of clearance these individuals have, if any, and what authority they even have to access this system. Finally, we're beginning to work on identifying employees for transfer to Schedule F with short response times of less than 90 days. Stopping Schedule F must be your top priority. Finally, the last story I'll read before saying a word about federal funding, and this is from a federal employee who works for HHS, Health and Human Services. After working first as a contractor, I transitioned to a competitive career permanent position. It's taken me years to get to this point. After graduating with a bachelor and master's degree, I faced competition from people returning to work after having been laid off during a recession. I'm married and pregnant. I'm the breadwinner, a woman, a homeowner. I pay taxes. I took an oath, and I love my job. The daily fear tactics and targeting of federal employees has uprooted my life. I no longer feel safe going on a vacation, making purchases or big purchases or doing anything, because every day I wonder if I'll have a job. What's happening is wrong. I'm pregnant with my first child. I didn't do anything wrong. I would have to separate from my husband weekly to keep my job if forced into a particular location. I can't make long drives due to sickness. What did I do wrong to deserve this? Working for the federal government is a dream. I was sold an American dream. Graduate from high school, go to college, get an advanced degree, get married, buy a home, have a baby, all in that order. I did everything I was supposed to do, and now myself and over 1 million other people are caught up in a political firestorm that we didn't ask for. Tell me, why am I being punished? What did I do wrong? When will they be satisfied? When we kill ourselves from depression for not being able to provide for our families? I suffer from anxiety and depression already. I can tell you, this is enough to push a regular person over the edge. What more for somebody who battles with their mental health? Why does no one care? Why should what I earn be ripped away from me? Why do millions deserve for our worlds to fall apart? Every day my mind goes through what is happening and all the consequences that could fall upon me. It's unsafe for my health, my baby's health, and my family. I ask for compassion, and I want people to know that we're hard workers. We are regular people. We are humans who are employed by the federal government. Please do something. An intentional strategy of traumatizing federal workers produces stories just like this, now in the hundreds, and by tomorrow I'll have hundreds more. And that's just one state, that's just Virginia. I know my colleagues are receiving these as well. And I see my colleague, Senator Baldwin, is here, and we'll take the floor in just a few minutes, but I do want to turn to not just federal employees, but the federal funding that's coming to Virginia and Virginia organizations. It's been hard, Mr. President, to get the sense of this because, of course, the administration didn't share anything with us. They didn't tell us what they were going to do. And my governor, frankly, hasn't been sharing with us either. The analogy I've been using is this funding order when it came out. I feel like a jigsaw puzzle was dumped in front of me on a desk upside down, and all I could see was the cardboard on the back of all the pieces. Nobody gave me the box with the picture on it, so I didn't even know what the jigsaw puzzle was supposed to be. I'm getting no information from the Trump administration. I'm getting no information from my governor about what this plan is, what's going on. But every time somebody shares a story like these, and every time someone calls my office, and every time a mayor talks to me about an infrastructure project or something, I turn over one of those pieces. And I've been turning over pieces for the last 10 days, and the picture is starting to emerge. Let me tell you what people in Virginia are telling me. I met today that my days are running together. I met yesterday with the Virginia Association of Community Health Centers. Mr. President, you know these. Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin has been very active in this space on the Health Committee. These are the federally qualified health centers, chartered and funded pursuant to congressional appropriations, to be the safety net for Americans' primary care. In Virginia, there are 29 federally qualified health centers that serve hundreds of thousands of individuals, and they're talented, focused in their localities and regions. These centers are particularly important in rural America that tends to have a shortage of primary health care providers. On Monday, when I came into the office, I had an outreach from one of our largest FQHCs in Hampton Roads area, the second largest metro area in Virginia, 1.6 million people. And here's what they said. They are used to getting a payment for their congressional appropriation at the end of every month. It would have come in on January the 29th. President Trump's executive order pausing federal funding had happened a few days before, but that order was enjoined. The Trump administration was ordered to continue to make payments and not pause federal payments, but this very large health clinic in Hampton Roads had not received their monthly payment on January 29th. And when they called to ask at their federal contact, what about the payment? They weren't given any answer about the January payment or about the February payment or about any payment. They couldn't get an answer. And so I had the entire association, coincidentally, in my office yesterday with representatives from virtually all of these, and I asked them what was going on, and they said well more than half of the FQHCs in Virginia had not received their January payment, had submitted to receive it under normal course of business at the end of January, but hadn't gotten it, and couldn't get an answer about when or whether they would get it. This is frontline health care for low-income people. If they are not getting primary health care, they're still going to get sick, and then they're going to be in emergency rooms, which is the worst place to get health care, creating long lines and congestion that'll make it harder for everybody else to get the treatment they need in emergency rooms. It will make people sicker. It will make hospitals more crowded for everybody who needs hospitals. And, you know, the thing about it is Russell Vought was not only the architect of the funding freeze, but now he and others are responsible for following the court order, for God's sake. The court order said they had to resume payments. My FQHCs are not getting paid. They're not getting paid. My Commonwealth's attorneys, my prosecutors around Virginia, they all get funding through various programs that come to our state's Department of Criminal Justice Services, and they use that federal grant funding to hire victim witness coordinators. I had the organization of prosecutors from Virginia in my office today, and they talked about how they rely on federal funding to hire victim witness advocates in their offices. That's not funded by the state. It's funded through the federal grant program, and they don't know whether they're going to get the funding for that. And so, compounding these concerns from federal employees, I have Head Start programs, I have healthcare clinics, I have Commonwealth's attorneys, I have sheriff's offices who get federal funding to provide mental health services for people who need mental health services in jails and in the community. They're not sure that they're going to get them. The compounding of confusion and fear is sharp and unnecessary and illegal. These are appropriated funds. I don't need to repeat everything that Senator Whitehouse said. Congress has appropriated these funds. Democrat and Republican House reached budgets together, signed by the president. The president is under an obligation to implement those funds. There's no legal authority for him to hold them back. Why is he holding them back? What did the patients at the health clinic in Hampton Roads do to get punished? One of the health clinics is called the Capital Area Health Clinic in Richmond today. They have 6 clinics around the Richmond metropolitan area. They've closed 3 of them. They've closed 3 of the 6. Other of the health clinics around the state are reducing services, trying to keep the doors open, but reducing services. And yet there's a court order that says they're supposed to be paid. But they're shutting the doors of their clinics and they're reducing services because the administration won't even follow a court order. It's my hope that they will. I don't think this is a glitch. I think this is an intentional effort to thwart a court order in order to hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt. So under these circumstances, there is no way that I or any of my colleagues can stand here and cast a yes vote for somebody who has declared their intention is to traumatize federal employees. I'll finish as I started. Who talks like that? Who talks like that? That is the professed goal of this individual who's been nominated for this most important post, and there is no circumstance under which I could cast a yes vote for someone harboring that kind of resentment. Finally, I asked Mr. Vogt in the confirmation hearing to tell me whose favorite presidents are. He's a Republican, so I felt like I had a pretty good sense of him. I asked him, do you admire Abraham Lincoln? He said, very much. I said, I do too. I do too. With malice toward none, with charity toward all. That's what Lincoln said to a divided nation during a civil war. He spoke to the South. He spoke to Confederates. He spoke to those who were waging war to try to destroy the Union. And what he said to them was, with malice toward none, with charity toward all. Mr. Vogt told me he admires Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln would never have thought to say, I want to traumatize you. I want you to not want to go to work because you are viewed as the villain. How far this grand old party has come from the lofty and noble sentiments of its founder when it is putting at the head of the federal workforce somebody whose desire is to traumatize federal workers. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Thank you. I rise today following my colleague from Maine to talk about Senate Joint Resolution 37, which we believe will come up for a vote later this afternoon, possibly somewhere between 6 and 7 o'clock. I am proud to have introduced this resolution a few weeks back together with a group of bipartisan senators, many of whom will take the floor this afternoon to speak about it. Let me just first talk about the fact that this resolution is a little bit unusual in the terms of Senate procedure. There are not many things that a single senator can file and then be guaranteed a floor vote. In fact, there's only 3 or 4 such procedures. This resolution is filed pursuant to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which was the act used by President Trump to declare the Canadian emergency that is the subject of my resolution. The IEPA statute is an old statute. It's been around for quite a while. And I'll just state at the outset that IEPA, the act that the president has used to declare an emergency and impose tariffs, is an act that was designed to be used against adversaries. Congress wanted to give the president tools to deal with adversaries, nations that were enemies, cartels, rogue states, dictators. IEPA was not designed to be used against allies. IEPA says nothing about tariffs. It does not say that the president's actions against adversaries should include tariffs. The administration's use of this Emergency Powers Act to go against an ally is pretty unusual. It's not unprecedented. The president did it in the first term when he imposed IEPA tariffs against both Canada and the EU. But it is important to know that this is generally a statute that was designed to counter adversaries. And I stand here strong in the belief that Canada is not an adversary, they're an ally. Canada is not the 51st state, they're a sovereign nation. And Canada is not an emergency for the United States. Are there differences of opinion between the United States and Canada? Sure there are. It just so happens in the trade space, we have a state-of-the-art trade deal negotiated by President Trump and his team, the USMCA, that was adopted by nearly a 90-10 vote in this body, that gives us the ability, when we have differences with this friend and ally Canada, to work them out. And it's unfortunate, in my view, that we're using an act, instead of going to the USMCA, we're using an act designed to counter adversaries to impose these tariffs. I want to talk about tariffs. I want to talk about the president's rationale for imposing the tariffs. And then I want to talk about the importance of this resolution and the many stakeholders outside this body who are supporting Senate Joint Resolution 37. First, on tariffs. President Trump's aides have basically admitted that this is a sales tax, a new sales tax. The tariff revenue will hit everyday people by making the cost of their goods go up. This is a CNN headline for a couple of days ago. Trump aide says tariffs will raise $6 trillion. That is a reference to Peter Navarro, which would be the largest tax hike in United States history. Now, to be fair, this is the total tariff effect, not just the Canada tariff effect. It is Canada and China and Mexico and potentially other nations. But what we are likely to see today with the tariff announcement, it will be the largest tax hike in United States history. Many have been writing about the challenges of tariffs and this tax hike. From CNBC, consumer confidence and where the economy is headed hits a 12-year low. And this was an economy that was extremely strong just 2 months ago on President Trump's inauguration day. It was a very, very strong economy, not a perfect economy. But since that time, we've seen volatility in the stock market, we've seen growing inflation, we've seen reducing consumer confidence, we've seen some suggestions of slowing economic growth, even negative economic growth from some, and that is due in large part to the prospect of this national sales tax tariffs to the degree of $6 trillion, but also somewhat to the chaos about whether and when and how they will be implemented. Other economists have also written. A recent article in the Washington Post talks about the market's grim view of tariff shenanigans. Markets have plummeted since Trump announced new levies on Canada, Mexico, and China, erasing nearly all gains since his election. The tariffs are still likely to be economically destructive. They will snarl global supply chains, raise costs to consumers, and cause layoffs in industries that depend on imported inputs like steel. This means more than just additional pain for consumers whipsawed by inflation, higher prices on imports, and now the possibility of a recession. Tariff shenanigans are shaking up the American economy, creating huge anxiety and already hurting consumers and businesses. A recent article in the Wall Street Journal called the Trump tariff effort the dumbest trade war in history. And the Wall Street Journal's point was a point that I made earlier, that why use IEEPA, a statute designed to go after enemies, when we have a trade deal that President Trump negotiated with Canada and Mexico? None of this is supposed to happen under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement that Mr. Trump negotiated and signed in his first term. And again, I give the president huge credit for this. I believe the USMCA vote in President Trump's first term got 89 votes in this chamber. That is hard on anything, much less a trade deal. What an accomplishment. But the USMCA created dispute resolution mechanisms that would make imposition of tariffs unnecessary. The U.S. willingness to ignore its treaty obligations, even with friends, won't make other countries eager to do deals. Maybe Mr. Trump will claim victory and pull back if he wins some token concessions. But if a North American trade war persists, it will qualify as one of the dumbest in history. I've given you challenges in the global economy and in the American economy that are happening because of the trade war. Let me now get specific on Virginia. I heard my colleague from Maine talk about who is affected in Maine. In Virginia, I've been traveling around the state talking to Virginians, and they're very, very worried about these Canadian tariffs. And they're not worried in the abstract. They saw them in 2018, 2019. So they know what happens with tariffs. It's an unusual group of businesses in that it is big, small, medium size, it's everybody. I have a bakery in Northern Virginia, Mom's Apple Pie. They have 3 locations. The owner, April, I see some nods. There are people who are Mom's Apple Pie fans. It's a great small business bakery. Their operations are Leesburg, Occoquan, and Purcellville. I was meeting recently with the owner, and she said, "You got to do something about these Canadian tariffs." I said, "April, now you have 3 small bakeries. Now tell me how the Canadian tariffs hit you." And she said, "Pie tins. All of our aluminum pie tins come from Canada. If you raise the price of a pie tin by 25%, the price of a pie goes up by a good bit. Nobody has to buy apple pies. When the price goes up, a whole lot of people will decide they're not going to buy apple pies." This is a classic small business that are affected by Canadian tariffs. Let's go to the largest businesses. We are experts at ship and sub building in Virginia. We manufacture the most sophisticated items that are made on the planet Earth: nuclear carriers and nuclear subs. 35% of the steel that goes into ships and subs made for our Navy, for our military, comes from Canada. 65% of the aluminum steel come from the U.S., but 35% come from Canada. I serve with the presiding officer on the Armed Services. We already are having a hard time producing ships and subs on time, on budget. Take aluminum and steel and ratchet it up by 20%. It's going to get even harder to defend the nation and to produce the ships and subs that we need. Like Senator Collins talking about her ag sector, ag and forestry is still the biggest industry in Virginia. People think of it as high tech. No, ag and forestry is still #1. And it is my farmers and foresters that are most concerned about the Canadian tariffs, because they saw what happened last time. The first thing that happens, you put a tariff on Canadian exports, potash, the ingredient in agriculture fertilizer. 80% of potash comes as an import into the United States. So that immediately goes up by 25%, according to what the president has said he's going to do. That hurts farmers very, very badly. Second, there's never been a one-sided trade war in the history of the world, so when one party puts a tariff on, the other side retaliates. And in the first Trump administration, the retaliation was heavily against the ag sector. My soybean farmers that were exporting soybeans couldn't export to markets that they were previously able to. My apple farmers who export apples to Canada couldn't do it to the same degree, and their exports drop and their revenues drop, and this is already a low-margin business. My distillers and wineries and breweries, many of whom find an important part of their revenue, might be 10% or 15% or 25% in export markets to the EU, to Canada, to Mexico, suddenly find that retaliatory tariffs price their products out of business. I was with Dave Cupertino, who is the founder of Reservoir Distillery in Richmond, yesterday, and he talked about the fact that even before these tariffs have gone into effect, because President Trump announced them but then delayed them, there's an anger in the Canadian consumer. We don't want to buy American products if you're going to treat us this way. And he's been told by his distributors in the Alberta province, there will be no American product put on any more shelves because we're so furious at the way we are being treated in this. Big businesses, small businesses. Volvo Trucks, one of the largest manufacturers in Appalachian, Virginia, in Dublin, Virginia, they manufacture all of the Volvo over-the-road trucks that you see anywhere in North America. They export significantly to Canada and Mexico. They also import source materials from Canada and Mexico. The tariffs will increase the cost of their inputs, driving the price of their trucks up, making those trucks less competitive. We have a lot of businesses in Virginia that have operations on both sides of the border. BWXT in Lynchburg, which is the nation's premier producer of nuclear reactors for ships and subs, as well as nuclear reactors for other possibilities. They have operations in Canada, and they ship product back and forth across the line in ways where the tariffs will make it more expensive. And so the Virginia effect, and let's be clear, there's another one, the senator talked about tourism. We rely on tourism in Virginia. We're a top 10 tourism state. And we have a lot of Canadian tourists. In fact, Canadians are among the most frequent visitors to Virginia Beach, our pristine, wonderful beachfront community. Canada tourism is strong. Canadian tourism to the United States, air reservations from Canadians coming to the United States are down by 75% because of a feeling that they're not being treated fairly. And they're looking at the United States, an ally, and they're saying, why us? And so the effect on the economy, big picture, stock market, inflation, at the kitchen table, the cost of groceries, building supplies come from Canada, a lot of lumber. Housing's already too expensive. A tariff on lumber coming in from Canada is just going to drive up the cost of any home renovation project or new home construction. The tariffs on Canadian automobiles, a lot of the U.S. plated automobiles are made, or at least products are significantly made in Canada. Those prices will go up. So from the kitchen table of a family to our nation's largest shipbuilders, these tariff shenanigans pose us huge economic risk. I go back to a point that was raised in the Wall Street Journal article. Why not use the USMCA? Why not use the USMCA? President Trump negotiated it. It was a success. It was something that succeeded in a bipartisan way. There have been discussions about whether after 5 or 6 years the USMCA should be renegotiated. I think that's fine. We renegotiated NAFTA. President Trump made it better. If 5 or 6 years of operating under USMCA has taught us ways that can be made better, that's fine too. But when you establish a treaty with an ally that includes a dispute resolution mechanism, why not use that mechanism instead of reaching for a statute that was designed to punish an adversary and putting massive sales taxes on goods that will make it harder for Americans to economically thrive? And so that does raise the question. If the USMCA was available, if there are differences of opinion on trade, why is the president imposing tariffs and using an emergency declaration rather than using the MCA? And I want to get to that next. The president has said there's one reason he's doing this. There's one reason for the emergency, for labeling Canada through this use of emergency power and adversary, and the reason is fentanyl. Fentanyl. No one in this chamber, no one here now or in any of the 100 senators would dispute that fentanyl is a massive problem and indeed an emergency. The opioid overdose deaths in my state, Alabama, all states, heartbreaking. The stories of families who lost their loved ones, heartbreaking. I was with a Roanoker earlier this morning, an ESPN reporter who was a gymnast and now works at ESPN, Lauren Keller. Lauren's from Roanoke, Virginia. She was in her freshman year at Rutgers when she got the call that her mother at age 45 had died. Her dad called her. She went to the airport. She flew home. By the time she landed in Roanoke, her dad had died as well, both overdosed on Oxycontin, opioid-based pain medications. So is fentanyl a problem? Yes. Is it an emergency? Yes. Is substance use disorder generally an emergency? Yes. Of course it is. That's why we passed, Mr. President, the HALT fentanyl bill just about 2 weeks ago in this chamber, big bipartisan vote. That's why we're putting budgetary resources into interdiction technology. That's why Senator Ernst and I got a provision in the defense bill 2 years ago to require more cooperation between the U.S. and Mexican military on fentanyl interdiction. It is an emergency, but fentanyl is not a Canadian emergency. And calling it a Canadian emergency and putting the same tariffs on Canadian products as we put on Mexican and Canadian products is an invented emergency, not a real emergency. And guess what? The Trump administration agrees with me on this. Even though the president has declared a Canadian fentanyl emergency, there's a biblical statement, I think, about the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. One of the president's key intelligence advisors, Tulsi Gabbard, appeared before the Senate Intelligence Committee last week, and she presented to the Intel Committee an annual assessment required of her office. It's called the Annual Threat Assessment, looking at every threat that the U.S. is under globally. Who is threatening us militarily? Who's threatening us with fentanyl? Who's threatening us with cyber attacks? Who's threatening us with misinformation? And as she presented the report to the committee, one of my colleagues, Senator Heinrich of New Mexico, looked through the report and noticed that Canada wasn't in the report. Canada was not even mentioned as a threat in the Trump administration's first annual threat assessment. There was even a section in the report specifically about fentanyl. Canada wasn't mentioned. And so my colleague asked the DNI, I don't see Canada mentioned. Canada's not mentioned as a threat, not even as a threat in fentanyl. And her testimony to the committee was, you're right, the fentanyl threat is a China and Mexico threat. It's not a Canada threat. So is there a fentanyl emergency? Yes, there is. Should action be taken to stop it? Yes, there should. Might that action even include looking at tariffs against China for sending precursor chemicals into the United States or into Mexico to be manufactured into fentanyl? Fair question. I haven't challenged the China tariffs. Should Mexico be subject to some tough action, possibly including tariffs because of their role in allowing so much fentanyl to come into the United States? Very fair question. That's why I haven't challenged the Mexico tariffs. But even the Trump administration, in their presentation to the Intel Committee, said that Canada was not a fentanyl threat. This is an article from the Globe and Mail, which is the largest daily newspaper in Canada, published in Toronto from last week. In the aftermath of Tulsi Gabbard's testimony, Canada not mentioned in U.S. threat assessment summary of fentanyl crisis. There is a fentanyl emergency, but it's not Canada's. So let's dig into this a little bit further. In 2024, let me tell you how much fentanyl was seized at the southern border of the United States. It's slightly over 21,000 pounds of fentanyl. Devastating, devastating. How about fentanyl seized coming from Canada into the United States? Half of that? A quarter of that? A tenth of it? About 1/2000th of it. The estimates have been, although there's a new report that's just coming out as I'm speaking on the floor from the Globe and Mail that are saying even these estimates are high, 21,000 pounds from Mexico, 43 pounds from Canada in the entire year of 2024. The Toronto Globe and Mail is doing an assessment of the 43 pounds, and here's what they found. That 43 pounds is an overstatement. The 43 pounds includes fentanyl interdicted in some northern cities like Spokane, Washington, and those were put on the Canadian interdiction stat, even though when we've dug into it, what we've discovered is even though Spokane's pretty far north, that fentanyl didn't come in from Canada, it came in from Mexico. And all the people that were arrested as the fentanyl was interdicted in these northern cities were connected to Mexican cartels. And so this gives some scale, 21,000 to 43 pounds, and the 43 pounds is dramatically overestimated. We think this actual number may be down in a very, very few pounds. It's not an emergency from Canada. And it's certainly not an emergency that would justify treating Canadian products with exactly the same tariff that we would levy on products from Mexico and from China. Mr. President, I think that allies are really important. And I think it's wrong to call an ally an adversary. Here's an article that appeared in the AP a little bit ago that I just want to read into the record. a beloved library that united the U.S. and Canada faces new border restrictions because of the President's emergency declaration. This appeared in the Associated Press on March 26th, just last week. And let me just read this into the record. For Allison Howell, her hometown library is more than just a place to borrow a book. It's also a unique space where different cultures from the U.S. and Canada have mingled and developed ties for more than a century. Howell and others fear that could change under a new regulation implemented by President Donald Trump's administration as tensions continue to rise between the two countries. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House straddles the line between Howell's village of Derbyline, Vermont, and the town of Stansted, Quebec. The entrance to the imposing brick-style and stone buildings on the U.S. side, but an informal agreement between the two countries has allowed Canadians to enter the library without a passport. Canadians cross the border on a sidewalk leading directly to the library that is monitored by the U.S. CBP. The nearest border checkpoint is not within eyesight of the building. Inside the library, there's a line on the floor marking the international border, though residents of both countries have been able to move freely among the stacks. But since Tuesday, the only Canadian visitors able to enter on the U.S. side have been card holders and library staff. All others have had to use an emergency exit. On the Canadian side, starting October 1, all Canadians will have to enter from their side of the border or pass through a security checkpoint on the U.S. side. It's a big change from the honor system arrangement the two countries have always used, users of the library said. This feels like one more step building a chasm between these nations, said Howell, who described the library as really special and a real symbol of international cooperation. Derbyline is a village of 700 people within the town of Derby, located in the rural Northeast Kingdom section of Vermont. Stansted is a town of about 3,000 residents. Like many rural border communities in the U.S. and Canada, their economies and cultures are linked, but the ties have become strained under President Trump, who has advanced tariffs and tightened border protections in some communities that rely upon one another. Why do this? Why do this? Like President Trump, I think it's right to say America first. But I don't want America alone. I don't want an America pushing aside its long-standing allies who have stood with us. Canada stood with us at 9/11. Canada has stood side by side with U.S. troops in every war we have been in. They have fought with our troops. They've bled with our troops. They've died with our troops in every war since the War of 1812. And yet we're going to treat them like an enemy. And we're going to make them come through an emergency exit into a library. This calls up to mind memories that I have of a South when I was born, where certain kind of people couldn't go in the same door as other kind of people. This is no way to treat an ally. This is no way to treat a friend. Mr. President, as I conclude, I see other colleagues here ready to speak. I'm happy to say that the Senate Joint Resolution 37 has picked up the support of a whole lot of people that I think are pretty important people outside this chamber. This morning, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce weighed in support of SJ Res 37. I'm going to read from the letter that they have sent to senators. The tariffs being imposed on imports from Canada and Mexico, America's top two trading partners, are inflicting real harm on American workers, companies, and farmers. Tariffs are taxes paid by Americans, and they will quickly increase prices at a time when many are struggling with the cost of living. These import taxes are also harming U.S. manufacturers and drawing retaliatory duties, worsening their impact on the economy. Further, these tariffs are at odds with the commitments the United States made in the landmark USMCA, which was negotiated by the first Trump administration. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce supports Senate Joint Resolution 37, and they join a number of other organizations. The AFL-CIO, that's threading a needle, Mr. President, when I get the AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on the same page on a matter of such importance. The United Steelworkers, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, the National Retail Federation, Retailers don't want to see costs of products increase. The North American Building Trades Union, sheet metal workers, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Foreign Policy for America, the National Taxpayers Union, tariffs are a tax, and Advancing American Freedom, the think tank that was established by former Vice President Michael Pence, all have weighed in to support SJ Res 37. Tariffs are a tax. Tariffs will hurt our families. Canada is not an enemy. Let's act together to fight fentanyl. We can do that. We have done that. We showed it with the Halt Fentanyl bill we passed 2 weeks ago. But let's not label an ally as an enemy. Let's not impose punishing costs on American families at a time they can't afford it. Let's not hurt American small businesses. Let's not make our national security investments in ships and subs more expensive. I earnestly request that colleagues support SJ 37 when we vote on it later today. And, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, thank you so much. I rise to join my colleagues. Really appreciate my colleague from Hawaii's leadership on this topic and the Senator from New Hampshire to talk about the pending discussion about the budget reconciliation bill and the vote-a-rama that will start in a few hours. I want to begin by thanking my colleagues for joining me to pass Senate Joint Resolution 37 2 days ago, the resolution that I had to challenge President Trump's Canadian tariffs, a horrible idea, and we were able to get 51 votes in this chamber. It was a privileged motion. Majority was sufficient to pass it, to turn off the Canadian tariffs because they hurt consumers, they hurt businesses, they hurt farmers, and they also hurt our national security by raising the price of aluminum and steel. 35% of the aluminum and steel that go into U.S. ships and subs comes from Canada, the other 65% from the United States. It was an important bill to pass because we don't need to put an additional sales tax on goods purchased by Americans that come from Canada. We don't need to inspire a Canadian retaliation against American products. And finally, we need to send the message we understand that Canada is not an adversary, but Canada is a friend. That bill passed the Senate on to the House. We're already working on the House side to see if we can get it passed there. But today, what I want to do is address not the Canadian tariffs that were announced now months ago, but the new, quote, reciprocal tariffs that President Trump announced on Wednesday in the South Lawn at the very moment that we were voting to overturn the Canadian tariffs. President Trump deemed these tariffs as, quote, reciprocal tariffs, but I got another phrase for them. They are economic idiocy. And I want to talk about why they are so bad, why the policy is bad, and when the policy is so bad and seemingly inexplicable, something else is going on, and I want to conclude by focusing on what that something else is. Mr. President, I went to the University of Missouri and I majored in economics, and I had some amazing professors, and I just want to give them a shout out. John Coolman, Whitney Hicks, Walter Johnson, Ron Roddy. I had some amazing professors at Mizzou. I graduated with an honors degree in economics in 1979, and if they were standing here with me, they would say, Tim Kaine, you are my student. I hope you remember what we talked about in these economic classes, and they would point out what I'm about to point out, why these tariffs announced broadly against virtually every nation in the world at the say-so of one person, a national sales tax falling on American consumers at the say-so of one person, why they are in fact economic idiocy. They will hurt our families, they will hurt our businesses, they will hurt our farmers, and all the economic signs suggest that President Trump is flipping the world's strongest economy toward recession. When we were kids, we all learned the fairy tale, I think it's a Grimm Brothers fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin, the mysterious figure that turned straw into gold, What we are now seeing is Trumpelstiltskins turning gold into straw. President Trump started with the strongest economy in the world the day he was inaugurated. A strong stock market, strong consumer confidence, strong growth rates and growth projections, manufacturing up, infrastructure up, America building again. And in 2 months, his chaotic economic idiocy has turned it around where the American economy, just go turn on the TV right now and look what's happening in the markets. The American economy has nothing but red lights and question marks all over it because of the economic idiocy. Economic idiocy is a strong charge for me. I'm not one to do a lot of name calling, but that's exactly what this is. And let me focus on some examples from President Trump's Wednesday announcement that show how idiotic these tariffs are. Japan and South Korea, two great allies of the United States. We have been working very carefully to deepen the relationship they have with each other and with us, to check against the nation that we all in this chamber and President Trump also views as our chief adversary, China. President Trump, on his Wednesday announcement, imposes a 24% tariff on goods coming from South Korea and a 25% tariff on goods coming from Japan. This is no way to treat a friend. And guess what these friends are doing? They met with China to talk about a free trade agreement. They met with China to talk about how they need to band together to protect themselves from the economic policy of the United States. Japan and South Korea are two of the best allies we have in Asia or anywhere in the world. And the relationships we have had with both nations have been very strong, whether it's military to military cooperation, trade, diplomacy, work together on humanitarian issues, on educational exchanges. Donald Trump's tariffs are chasing Japan and South Korea into China's arms. Idiocy. Here's one, Mr. President. Israel is an ally and Iran is an adversary. I think we could get a 100-0 vote on that proposition in this chamber. Israel is an ally, Iran is an adversary. Guess what President Trump did with his tariffs on Wednesday? A 17% tariff on Israel and Iran, 10% tariff. 17% tariff on our ally Israel and Iran, 10% tariff. What kind of friend is that? How is that as a way to treat an ally? We are rock solid in sending military support to Israel. I helped whip votes almost exactly a year ago in the Senate floor to get a $14 billion defense aid package for Israel. But we're going to put a higher tariff on Israel than on Iran? It makes no sense. It's idiocy. Here's another one. Trump says these are reciprocal tariffs. We are putting tariffs on nations who are treating us unfairly in trade. But he's imposing tariffs even on nations that put no tariffs on U.S. products, that have no trade barriers on U.S. products. Singapore has no trade barriers on U.S. products, but Trump is socking them with tariffs anyway. Israel has no trade barriers on U.S. products, but Trump is socking them with tariffs anyway. Idiocy. Idiocy. Here's another one. Trump, in his rambling monologue on the South Lawn on Wednesday, where he defined groceries as a bag with stuff in it, I was very happy to be enlightened about what groceries are. He said that he was imposing tariffs on nations where the U.S. has trade deficits. So the idea is we're going to put tariffs on them because you're not buying enough of our stuff. We want to penalize nations with trade where the U.S. has a trade deficit. But guess what? We have trade surpluses with Brazil, Australia, Hong Kong, the Netherlands, Singapore, and the UK. So what did Donald Trump do? He put tariffs on them anyway. He said it was about trade deficits, and he's putting tariffs even on nations that are buying more of our products than we're buying of theirs. Idiocy. Idiocy. In Donald Trump's first term, he encouraged American businesses to move their supply chains out of China. And a lot of businesses did. Many American businesses followed Donald Trump's instructions and moved their supply chains from China to Vietnam. And in President Trump's first term, he boasted about that. He patted himself on the back. I told these American companies, pull your supply chain out of China. And when they went to Vietnam, he patted himself on the back about that. So what's he doing now? 46% tariff on imports from Vietnam. Well, that's quite a way to treat American companies that move their supply chains out of China at your request just a few years ago. Some moved their supply chains to nations like Cambodia or other nearby nations. Trump socked them all. He socked them all with tariffs, even for these businesses who did move their supply chains at his request. And then we get to something that has been more widely known. Trump putting tariffs on tiny, nearly uninhabited islands. Reunion, the Heard and McDonald Islands, Norfolk Island. There is a tiny French island off the coast of Canada that I will admit I was not even aware of, St. Pierre and Miquelon. 50% tariff on these places. I mean, I will say one thing about Donald Trump's tariffs that's good, and it's the only thing that's good. It's made a lot of people pull out their globe and look at nations that they didn't even know existed. St. Pierre and Miquelon will now have a 50% tariff. Heard and McDonald Islands, a 10% tariff. Svalbard and Jan Mayen, which are actually not even a country, it's part of Norway, a 10% tariff. Norfolk Island, a 29% tariff. Reunion, 37% tariff. Donald Trump at least has inspired interest in geography, a subject that often kids find boring. Okay, so I've gone through these examples of pure idiocy. The tariffs are not designed to punish adversaries, since we are hurting allies and treating them worse than adversaries in many ways. The tariffs are not designed to lower trade barriers, since nations with no trade barriers are still getting socked. The tariffs are not designed to counter trade deficits, since nations where we have trade surpluses are getting socked. So why do them at all? Why punish Americans with a national sales tax, which all the economists say is the largest peacetime tax ever imposed in U.S. history? If it's not to reduce trade barriers, if it's not to punish nations with trade deficits, if it's not designed to punish nations that are adversaries, why would we impose a sales tax on the American consumer, the American family, American businesses, American national security? That's what we're going to be talking about tonight during the Vote-A-Rama. That's what you will see Democrats emphasizing with amendments that we are offering. These tariffs are not about trade deficits, trade barriers. They're not about the behavior of adversaries. It's about raising money to fund a tax cut for the rich. That's what they're about. Peter Navarro, the president's chief economic advisor, says, and I think this is probably optimistic, but these guys like to puff up the numbers. He says that these tariffs will raise $6 trillion over the course of the next 10 years, about $600 billion, all taken out of the pockets of everyday Americans who are paying more for groceries, who are paying more for building supplies when they do a home renovation, farmers who are paying more from fertilizer because the key component, potash, 80% of it comes from Canada. The $6 trillion that these tariffs will raise all come out of the pocketbooks of Americans who are working hard and who don't want to pay more taxes. But they're going to fork over $6 trillion because of these tariffs. And then President Trump and my colleagues here are setting up a budget where they'll take that $6 trillion and they'll add to it all of these slash and burn cuts that chainsaw-wielding Elon Musk are finding by laying off 80,000 people at the VA or indiscriminately firing veterans in every agency in the federal government. They'll combine the tariff revenue with the savings from Medicaid cuts or cuts to school nutrition or cuts to the Pell Grant program, and then they will take all of that revenue and hand it over to the richest people in this country, many of whom are the richest people on the planet Earth, in tax cuts for the wealthiest. How do we know? How do we know to predict that? We know because that's what they did when Donald Trump was president in 2017. In 2017, the tax bill that passed by a simple majority vote in this body was a big giveaway to the rich, and that's what Trump and my Republican colleagues are preparing to do yet again. The only difference between 2017 and now is this. In 2017, when the Republicans, Donald Trump gave a tax cut to the rich, they didn't pay for it. It was all on the deficit. They just put it on the credit card for our kids and grandkids to pay. This time, they've decided they don't want to continue to jack up the deficit, although they're likely to anyway. And so they think they need to pay for the tax cut. How are they going to pay for it? By cutting programs that everyday Americans rely on and by socking families and businesses with a $6 trillion tariff tax increase imposed purely to fund a tax cut for Donald Trump and his friends. That's what we're going to fight against in this budget. And in the same way that we succeeded by getting Republicans to vote with us against the Canadian tariffs a few days ago, it is my hope that when we get to the end of this process, we will have some Republican colleagues in this House and the next who will stand up against a president who thinks one man can shatter the economy and impose costs on everyday people to benefit himself and his friends. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, the Constitution of the United States puts two powers clearly within the hands of Congress: the power to tax and the power to conduct trade policy, including the imposition of tariffs. These are powers for Congress, not the executive. But President Trump finds Congress an inconvenience, and he has decided to take both of these powers onto his own shoulders. By imposing a national sales tax, that's what his global tariff regime is, without any vote in Congress, purely on his own say-so, and to engage every nation in the world in a trade war on his own say-so without involving Congress. President Trump has said in the past, "I alone can fix it," and we know that that statement is false. No one alone can fix the big challenges facing our nation. But I think if he were to say, "I alone can break it," the results of the last 100 days would have proven him correct. President Trump, on Inauguration Day, inherited the strongest economy on the planet Earth. Not a perfect economy, but the strongest economy, the envy of other industrialized nations. That's what he had just 100 days ago. And we know this morning that strong economy, which was growing for 3 years at a very solid pace, is now contracting. It's not only the contraction of the economy, it's chaos in the stock market, it's declining consumer confidence, it's projections of recession by Federal Reserve districts and major economists. All of this is happening because Donald Trump has pursued a three-step strategy of his own: massive layoffs of employees, contrary to congressionally passed appropriations bills; massive slashing of federal spending programs, including those relied upon by everyday Americans, in contravention of congressionally appropriated spending bills; and the waging of a tariff war against the entire planet. And as my colleagues have said, it's a tariff war that gets announced and then suspends and then delayed and then announced again, and then exceptions might be granted if we like you or not. It's chaos. Last week, I traveled around the Commonwealth of Virginia. I talked to businesses everywhere in my state. And they talked about the layoffs, and they talked about the spending cuts, and they talked about the tariffs, and they added those three together and said what those three add up to is chaos. The chaos of unpredictability. Many businesses told me, excuse me, Mr. President, that they want to make investments. They want to make investments to grow their businesses in Virginia, but they're unwilling to make a decision to invest as long as the rules of the road are chaotic and up in the air. Businesses that import natural products to turn into finished products have to pay a tariff on the import. Businesses who sell their product abroad are losing markets as nations put retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. And so these businesses are pausing their investment decisions. Businesses in Virginia that are connected to multinational businesses are saying that their headquarters are deciding, well, we can invest in the United States or we can invest in another country. It's not wise to invest in the United States when everything is so chaotic. Let's be clear, and I spoke this with my colleagues when I talked about the Canada tariff provision that we successfully rebuked the president on a month ago. A tariff is nothing more than a sales tax. It's a sales tax on the products that everyday Americans use, especially groceries and clothing and building supplies, and for farmers, the cost of fertilizer that they need as they're engaging in spring planting. Trump's worldwide tariffs are nothing but a new sales tax. And the analysis, as this chart shows, of who the tariffs raise taxes on, like every other form of sales tax, tariffs are regressive. They hit lower income people the most. The average tax change as a share of income, if the Trump tariffs are implemented, it's essentially on the poorest 20% of the American population, the equivalent to an additional 6.2% sales tax. For the next wealthiest quintile up, it's a 5.5% increase on sales tax. For the next, it's 5.0. All the way up for the richest 1% will see their effective sales tax rate go up by 1.7%. This is a sales tax on everyone in the country, but it's a sales tax that, as all sales taxes do, falls hardest on those who can least afford it. The new sales tax is affecting retirees particularly so. From NBC News, retirees stunned as market turmoil over tariffs shrinks their 401ks. We have a Social Security system that is a good foundation for retirement so long as this administration doesn't mess it up, but it's not sufficient for retirement. And what you need for a dignified retirement is Social Security plus private savings, in most people's case, 401ks. The turmoil in the market, driven by tariff uncertainty, is hammering retirees more than just about any other group of people in this country. The new sales tax is also a drag on economic growth. We saw this in the announcement this morning, but not just economic growth in the United States. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and I had a chance to go visit 2 weeks ago with the new government, incoming government in Germany. Germany's a great ally. More U.S. troops are on the ground in Germany than any nation other than Japan outside the United States. We're security partners in Ukraine and in European security generally. The new German government was just elected. The chancellor will be installed in the first week in May with a mandate to restore the German economy, which has been in the doldrums since about 2019. And as I talked to German leaders, military leaders, and leaders in the civilian government, they said, this is going to be the most pro-American, pro-transatlantic chancellor you'll have seen for a very long time, but he's coming in with a powerful mandate to grow the German economy so that we can be even better security partners, so that we can work better together on the manufacture of the F-35 and to help Ukraine in its defense. But the Trump tariffs are standing directly in the way of this new pro-American government being able to achieve what they need to achieve. And that's why the IMF says that the Trump tariffs, this new sales tax, will be a drag not just on U.S. economic growth, but on global economic growth. This is a story just from less than a week ago. U.S. manufacturing was already slowing before the GDP numbers came out today. A larger share of manufacturers are reporting declines in new orders than increases. Some of those declines are driven because of the price effect of tariffs, the price effect of retaliatory tariffs, but some are also being driven by the uncertainty. There is a chaos penalty on the economy. When you're not sure what's going to happen, you slow your investments, and that's why you see a decline in manufacturing. The Trump new sales tax, again, as proof from Reuters, Trump tariffs would harm all involved, U.S. trade partners say. This is not just something that's hurting everyday Americans. Those are those to whom we have a responsibility in this body, but this is affecting the global economy in a way that is shocking. And China, Japan, South Korea, a company from South Korea just announced a huge investment in Virginia yesterday in the clean energy space. These are, Japan and South Korea especially, are countries that do a lot of foreign direct investment in the United States. Japan and South Korea, two of our strongest partners, but even they are responding in a hostile way to U.S. tariffs. In fact, you see China, Japan, and South Korea starting to cooperate together to ward off some of the negative economic effects of U.S. tariffs. The last thing we want to do is encourage Japan and Korea to work closer with China. We want Japan and South Korea to work closer with the United States, but the Trump tariffs are chasing allies into the arms of adversaries. How foolish is that? And then we end up with the chaos argument that my colleagues have mentioned before. From the New York Times last week, with only bad options, businesses scramble for a tariff chaos playbook. A tariff chaos playbook. When the costs of your inputs are going up, when your export market is shrinking, when you don't know what the end of the story will be, the options that you have are very murky. Businesses want to have predictability. They want to be able to look into a crystal ball, and if they don't completely know the future, they want to be able to make enough of a prediction about the economic climate that would justify sizable investments. And in a time of chaos, those investments are not going to be made, and that raises the danger that this first quarter economic contraction will be followed by another, which would be the textbook definition of a recession. So how did we get here? From an economy on Inauguration Day that was the strongest in the world, when President Trump stood 50 yards from here and said it was a golden age, to an economy that has nothing but red lights and question marks all over it, we got here because one individual decided to bypass Congress and take both the taxing power and the trade power into his own hands without a debate, without committee hearings, without deliberation, without considering what the people thought about the plan, and that one man and his decisions have taken a chainsaw to the American economy. We must turn this around, and the good news is the Senate has the ability to turn it around. When the Congress passed the IEPA law decades ago, it recognized the potential that an executive could overuse the emergency power. And that's why Congress did something rare in IEPA. They gave the power even to a single senator in the minority party to say, wait a minute, Mr. President, you've declared an emergency, and guess what, you're wrong. And even at the request of a single senator, this body is put on the board to have to declare whether we own the policies of the president, this Trump madness, or whether we disown it and urge him to take a different path. All the economic trends are pointing the same direction. We should take a different path on the economy before this gets worse. The vote we will have later today gives the Senate, the greatest deliberative body in the world, the chance to stand up and say, let's take a different path. I thank my colleagues for their work together on this important resolution and urge a favorable vote on the resolution that we will have later today. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. The remaining two speakers, Senator Schumer has yielded his time to me. I will be the last speaker before the vote. My colleague from Idaho says this is driven by hate and vitriol. Tell President Trump he well knows that from my first months in the Senate, I have taken this position now against 4 presidents, Democratic and Republican. The principles that have been stated on this floor about the Constitution and War Powers Resolution are very, very clear. Congress declares war. Once declared, the President is the Commander-in-Chief. There is no war without a declaration of Congress. The President, as Commander-in-Chief, can defend the United States against imminent attack, but there was no such imminent threat posed by the Iranian nuclear program, as the President's own national security advisor testified to Congress shortly before this strike, and as the Israeli foreign minister announced before the U.S. strike that the Israeli actions had set the nuclear program back 2 or 3 years. No imminent attack on the United States, no imminent threat. That means Congress gets to declare war. This is not about hatred for any president. It is about standing up and doing what we took an oath to do. My colleague from South Carolina says we've only declared war 5 times, ending with World War II. That's not accurate. Congress has had the guts to at least vote on authorizing war up through 2002. But in 2002, something happened, Mr. President, in this body. The Senate and the House got lied into a war with bogus intelligence about the weapons program of the nation of Iraq. We should be haunted by that. We should be haunted by that. The claims that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction led us into a war where thousands of troops and thousands of U.S. contractors were killed. And so what should have been the learning that came out of that we should do a good job kicking the tires as Congress before we go into a war and not get lied into a war. Instead, Mr. President, what I fear, since there's been no willingness of Congress to vote on any war since 2002, is what members of this body have decided is, wow, we got it wrong. We were lied into a war. We voted in a way that we regretted. So let's not vote at all. Let's not vote at all. Let's overturn the congressional and constitutional history that says we only go to war with Congress and try to hide in the grass. Many of my colleagues have said things about Iran and how bad Iran is. None of them have ever introduced an authorization for war against Iran. If Iran is so bad, do that. People in this body would rather not vote so they can't be held accountable. I get that. That's a human impulse. It's just a human impulse that so disrespects the service of our men and women in uniform. If we're going to send troops into harm's way, our sons and daughters, whether they're flying bombing missions or ground troops or covert operations, we ought to have the guts in this body to cast a vote saying that that war is necessary. Not just act as cheerleaders and hide from culpability, hide from accountability, hide from responsibility. If you vote against Senate Joint Resolution 59, what you are saying is this president should be able to wage war without coming to Congress. If you think the president should have to come to Congress, whether you're for or against a war in Iran, you'll support Senate Joint Resolution 59. You'll support the Constitution that has stood the test of time. You'll support your oath. I urge a positive vote on the resolution, and I yield back.
Question occurs on the motion to discharge S.J. Res. 50.